The old woman begged shelter with her 2 daughters. What the mountain man did shocked everyone. Before we begin, comment your country so I know where this story is reaching. Winter had settled over Elk Ridge like a great white weight, pressing down on every living thing. Snow covered the land so deeply that trees bowed beneath it, and travel became a test of the soul. Most folks stayed close to fires and locked their doors tight. But 3 travelers had no choice but to keep walking. Ruth Malin led her daughters across the ridge with slow, determined steps. Her shawl, worn thin through years of hardship, provided little warmth, but she held her head high for the sake of the girls beside her. Junie, the older daughter, stayed close, guiding Alma whenever the younger one stumbled. Alma's breaths grew weaker with every mile, each exhale a thin whisper lost in the cold. They had been turned away from towns, cabins, and camps. No one wanted strangers during winter, especially a woman with 2 dependents. Some people shut their doors without a word. Others simply pointed downhill and told them to try their luck elsewhere. Ruth answered every rejection with the same steady nod, refusing to weep in front of her girls. But now, even Ruth felt her strength slipping. The cold clawed into her bones. Junie's steps dragged. Alma's head rested heavily against her sister's shoulder. Ruth whispered, "Just a little farther, my loves." There must be a place willing to spare one corner of warmth. As if an answer, a thin trail of smoke curled into the sky ahead, barely visible through the drifting snow. Ruth's heart thudded. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant someone lived there. Whether that someone would show mercy was a question for later. Hope alone pushed her forward. They reached a small cabin tucked beneath leaning pines. The windows glowed faintly. Ruth steadied herself, lifted her numb hand, and knocked. The sound was weak, swallowed instantly by the storm. She knocked again, harder this time. Inside lived Elias Boone, a man who had grown used to silence. He worked with wood, tended his land, and rarely spoke unless the mountain spoke first. His days were simple and predictable, which suited him fine. That evening he was repairing a loose strap on his winter coat when the knocking startled him. He froze, uncertain if he truly heard it. When it came again, a quiet urgency behind it, he rose and opened the door just enough to let light spill out. There stood Ruth, snow in her hair, exhaustion in her eyes. Junie struggled to support Alma, whose face was pale and strained. Ruth tried to straighten herself. "Sir, please, a warm place of the night. My daughter cannot bear another hour in this cold." Elias looked from Ruth to Junie, then down at Alma, whose shaking hands clutched the air as though reaching for warmth she couldn't find. The sight pierced something inside him, something he'd tried for years to keep buried. He opened the door fully. Coming before the cold finishes what it started. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around them like a blanket. Alma collapsed near the hearth, and Junie knelt beside her, trying to rub life into her hands. Ruth hovered uncertainly until Elias guided her toward a chair. He worked quietly, setting a pot of water on the stove, adding dried vegetables and a handful of salted meat. Ruth watched him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. This man didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. He simply acted, as though their presence required no justification at all. When he draped his thick coat over Alma, the child opened her eyes just enough to see his face. For the first time in days, her breathing eased. Ruth murmured, "You don't know what you've done for us." Elias shook his head. Cold is no place for turning people away. They ate slowly, quietly, each spoonful bringing warmth back into limbs that had nearly given up. Junie sat close to Alma, never glancing away from her sister's face. Ruth's hands trembled as she held her bowl, but her eyes softened for the first time in months. As they settled, Elias placed more wood on the fire. He didn't hover or push conversation. He simply kept the room warm and safe, as though it were the most natural thing in the world to shelter strangers on a night when the wind howled like a hungry thing outside. Ruth studied him, trying to understand the kind of man who offered help without expecting anything in return. Most kindness she had known in life came with conditions. This felt different. Steady, quiet, genuine. Alma fell asleep, wrapped in Elias's coat. Junie soon followed, exhaustion pulling her down. Ruth remained awake a little longer, watching the flames dance. "Why did you take us in?" she asked softly. Elias stared into the fire. "Because once, long ago, someone helped me when I had nothing. I learned then that warmth belongs to all who need it." Ruth let out a trembling breath. "You may have saved my daughter's life tonight." Elias didn't answer, but his eyes lingered on Alma again, and something gentle moved in his expression. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, for the first time in a long while, all three travelers felt a faint stir of safety. Morning came slowly to the mountains, the sky turning from iron gray to a softer silver. The storm had not fully eased, but it no longer threatened to swallow the cabin whole. Inside, the air held a rare warmth. The fire still smoldered, blankets lay heaped around the sleeping girls, and a pot of broth warmed gently on the stove. Ruth woke first. Her back ached, but the ache felt like a blessing. It meant she had lived through another night. She pushed herself upright and looked toward Alma, who lay curled near the hearth, cheeks faintly pink instead of ghostly pale. Junie slept beside her, one protective arm draped over her sister's waist. Ruth bowed her head and whispered a small prayer of gratitude. Elias sat at the table, whittling a piece of pine into a rough shape. He nodded to Ruth as she stirred. "She's breathing stronger today," Ruth said quietly. "She will keep improving if she stays warm and fed." Elias answered. Ruth hesitated. "We've already taken more from you than we ever hoped to receive." Elias didn't look up from the wood. "Then take a little more." Winter storms don't care about pride. A silence settled between them, not heavy, but thoughtful. Ruth studied him. He carried the stillness of a man who had lost more than he ever spoke about. His voice held the weight of someone accustomed to loneliness. Yet something in his manner suggested he had not forgotten how to care. When Junie and Alma woke, Elias served a warm mash made from oats and dried berries. Alma ate slowly, but the color in her face deepened with each bite. Junie watched Elias with quiet caution, unsure whether to trust his kindness. Trust had been a luxury she had not felt in years. "We should head out today," Junie murmured to her mother when Elias stepped outside to chop wood. "We can't live on this man's goodwill." "We aren't living on anything," Ruth replied gently. "We are surviving, and sometimes survival means accepting what is freely given." Junie's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. Later that morning, Elias returned, stamping snow off his boots. He glanced toward Alma, who was wrapped in blankets on the floor, humming faintly as she played with a wooden spoon. Her recovery was slow, but undeniably real. "She'll need at least a few more days before she's strong enough to travel," Elias said. Junie crossed her arms. "You've done enough. We can manage." Ruth touched her daughter's arm. "Junie, kindness isn't a debt. Don't turn it into one." Elias acted as though he hadn't heard. "There's space here. No reason for you to freeze on the trail." Junie looked at him for a long moment, searching for hidden motives. She found none, only patience and perhaps something else, something damaged but genuine. By midday, Alma leaned on Ruth and stepped outside for the first time. The cold air pinched her cheeks, but she smiled nonetheless. Elias lifted her gently and placed her on a thick fur laid across a wooden bench, so she could feel the sun without losing warmth. "You remind me of someone I once knew," Elias said softly as Alma giggled at a bird hopping across the snow. "Who?" Alma asked, a little girl who found joy in almost everything. He paused, his eyes turning distant. She didn't stay long in this world, but she taught me more than most grown men ever have. Ruth listened quietly. Loss recognized loss. She didn't ask questions. Elias didn't offer more. As the afternoon wore on, Junie offered to help with chores. She shoveled snow from the walkway, carried firewood, and swept the cabin floor. She worked not out of obligation, but because doing nothing made her uneasy. Elias didn't stop her. He simply nodded, as if understanding that work was her way of settling her thoughts. When evening arrived, the four of them shared a simple meal. Ruth told small stories from her younger days. Nothing dramatic, just memories of harvesting apples, sewing late into the night, and Alma's stubbornness as a toddler. Elias listened quietly, his features softening in ways Ruth had never expected from such a solitary man. After the girls fell asleep, Ruth lingered near the stove, warming her hands. "You didn't hesitate to take us in," she said. "Most people would have." Elias shrugged slightly. "Most people fear what misfortune might cost them. I learned long ago that giving costs less than regret." Ruth's eyes filled, not with sorrow, but relief. "I thought the world had forgotten that kind of heart." Elias shook his head. "It hasn't. It just hides during the cold months." Junie pretended to sleep, but she heard every word. Something inside her, worn thin by disappointment, shifted ever so slightly. For the first time in many winters, the Malin family slept without fear of waking to a closed door or an unforgiving world. And for Elias Boone, the silence he had lived with for so long felt a little less heavy. Days passed, and the storm loosened its grip on the mountains. The air remained cold, but the sky lightened and the wind no longer screamed through the trees. Inside the cabin, life found a gentle rhythm the Malin family had forgotten was possible. Alma regained her strength quickly. She followed Elias from room to room, asking questions about every tool he owned. He answered in few words, but each answer softened him a little more. Ruth spent her mornings mending blankets, humming low songs from her childhood. Junie chopped wood, scrubbed the table, swept the floors, anything to repay the man who asked nothing from them. Yet underneath the peace ran another feeling: uncertainty. Every night Junie wondered when they would need to move on. Every evening Ruth wondered whether they should. And Elias, though silent, felt the same tension. He had expected their stay to be brief, like a snowflake landing and melting. Instead, every day with them in the cabin stirred memories of what warmth felt like, memories he had sealed away for years. One morning, Junie approached her mother by the stove. "Alma is walking again," she said quietly. "Her fever is gone. We should think about leaving before we burden him." Ruth sighed. "A burden is not what we've been made to feel here." "That doesn't mean we should overstay," Junie replied. "People change when they feel trapped." Ruth touched her daughter's cheek gently. "Some people change for the better, and some simply reveal who they have always been." Junie wanted to argue, but Alma burst into the room, rosy-cheeked and excited. "Elias made me a wooden bird," she squealed. "Look, it even has little wings." Junie watched the way Alma glowed, her laughter free of fear for the first time in weeks. A pang tightened in her chest. She couldn't deny that this place had given Alma more than warmth. It had given her safety. It had given her childhood back. Later that afternoon, Ruth stepped outside for fresh air while Elias repaired a broken fence post. She watched him from a distance, noticing how carefully he worked, how patient he was with every detail. She approached slowly. "You've done more than you know," she said, "not just for Alma's body, but for her spirit." Elias tapped the last nail into place. "Children heal faster when the world gives them room to breathe." "She has room here," Ruth said softly. More than she's had in a long time. Elias wiped his hands on his trousers. Room is enough. You still need a future you can walk into. Ruth studied him. And what about you? Don't you need one too? Elias went quiet. The question touched a place he rarely allowed anyone near. Ruth didn't push further, because the truth was already in the silence. That evening, Junie found Elias near the fire, carving another shape in the palm of his hand. You don't have to keep feeding us, she said gently. We'll be gone soon. He didn't look up. There's no rush. Junie clasped her hands in front of her. There is. For us. Everywhere we stay too long, people begin to expect something. Payment. Work. Gratitude. Sometimes more than that. Elias set down the carving. Do you think I'm waiting for something from you? Junie swallowed. I don't know what men want anymore. I've seen too many turn kind in the beginning, only to reveal the cost later. Elias met her eyes then, steady, not offended, not angry, just honest. What I do here is not an investment, he said. It doesn't require repayment. Kindness that demands something in return isn't kindness at all. Junie's breath trembled. She hadn't realized how deeply she needed to hear those words. As night fell, Alma drifted to sleep beside Ruth, but Junie remained awake, wrestling with a decision she could no longer ignore. This place had become more than a shelter. It had become a possibility. A life that didn't require running. A life where fear didn't lead every choice. But before she could make sense of that possibility, everything shifted. Near dawn, Elias stepped outside to fetch water from the well. The snow crunched under his boots. The world felt still, too still. Then he noticed it. The print of a boot in the snow that wasn't his. He followed the trail around the side of the cabin. A second print, then a third. Someone had been watching the cabin during the night. He returned inside quietly, not wanting to alarm the sleeping family. But something in his expression changed, sharp and alert. Ruth noticed immediately. Elias? Is something wrong? Tracks near the east wall, he said. Old enough that whoever left them is gone, but fresh enough to mean someone was close. Junie stiffened. Do you think they followed us? Elias didn't answer directly. What matters is keeping all of you safe. For the first time since arriving, Junie didn't argue. She simply nodded. Ruth placed her hand over her heart. We can't bring danger to your door. Elias shook his head. You didn't. But danger knows how to find those who suffered enough already. Alma woke with sleepy eyes, unaware of the quiet storm forming in the room. Junie watched Elias closely then, not with suspicion this time, but with a dawning realization. This man didn't just want to shelter them. He cared what happened beyond the shelter. He cared in a way neither she nor Ruth had expected. And that care frightened her more than any tracks in the snow, because care made leaving impossible. And leaving was all she had ever known. The next days passed with a strange mixture of peace and unease. Inside the cabin, life grew warmer. Outside, the fresh boot tracks lingered in everyone's minds like a quiet warning. Ruth tried not to show her worry, but her hands trembled whenever Alma stepped too far from her side. Junie's eyes followed every sound in the woods. Elias checked the perimeter each morning before the family awoke. Yet in spite of all that, the cabin slowly became something none of them had expected. A home. Elias added more blankets to the beds, as though planning for them to stay. Ruth began tending the small herb jars on his shelves, reviving plants he hadn't touched in years. Alma helped him sort firewood, humming as she worked. Junie baked cornbread with the last of the flour, wanting to give back in a few ways she knew how. One afternoon, Elias stepped inside to find Junie brushing Alma's hair by the hearth. Alma looked healthier than she had since before winter. Ruth sat nearby, sewing a thick patch onto one of Elias's shirts. It was such an ordinary, gentle scene that it stopped him in the doorway. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Ruth said with a smile. "No," Elias answered quietly. "Not a ghost. Just something I thought I'd never see again." Junie paused, but didn't ask what he meant. The truth was written in his voice. That evening, as the fire glowed warm and steady, Ruth approached him with a seriousness that settled the room. "We've stayed longer than we planned," she said. "Winter has given us no choice, but we can't take advantage of your kindness." Elias shook his head. "Kindness ends when someone feels unwanted. Do any of you feel unwanted here?" Junie lowered her eyes. Alma stared at the floor. Ruth's voice softened. "We don't want to be another burden life has placed on you." "You're not a burden," Elias said, more firmly than he expected. "I spent too many years alone believing solitude was safer. You three walked through that door and proved me wrong." His words hung in the air, surprising even himself. Alma climbed onto his knee without hesitation. "Mama says we might leave soon," she whispered. "But I don't want to. It's warm here, and you're nice." Elias swallowed hard. "I want you safe, little one. All of you." Junie watched quietly. Her heart pulled in two directions, toward the wandering life she knew, and toward this still place offering something she never trusted: stability. Later that night, Junie found Elias on the porch. Snowflakes drifted lazily around them. "You barely know us," she said. "Why do you care what happens to us?" Elias didn't turn. "Because I know what it feels like to lose the last person who gave you reason to stay alive." His voice softened. "And I know what it feels like when someone gives you a second chance you didn't earn." Junie felt something loosen inside her chest, something she had kept guarded for years. "Ruth thinks we should leave as soon as the weather warms." "And you?" he asked. Junie hesitated. "I don't know. For the first time, I don't know." Elias finally looked at her. "You don't have to decide today." The next morning brought a calm that seemed almost unreal. The sky was bright, the wind gentle. Snow melted in slow rivulets along the cabin steps. Alma played with her wooden bird outside, while Ruth cleaned the stove. Junie stepped out to gather firewood and found Elias repairing a gap in the fence. "Elias," she said softly, "if we stayed just for a while longer, would that be all right with you?" He didn't lift his head at first. He simply finished tying the rope around the post. Then he exhaled. "You staying wouldn't trouble me," he said. "In fact, I think this place has been waiting for voices besides my own." Junie felt warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar but welcome. "Alma feels safe here," she said. "Mama does too. And I think I do as well." Elias finally met her gaze. "Then stay, as long as it brings you peace." Ruth stepped outside just in time to hear those words. Instead of looking surprised, she smiled as though she had been hoping for this moment all along. "We've wandered enough," she said softly. "If the mountain allows it, perhaps we can rest here for a season." Elias nodded, but Ruth saw something deeper in his eyes, gratitude he didn't know how to voice. That evening, Alma tugged at Elias's sleeve. "Are we a family now?" she asked. He didn't speak right away. His throat tightened, but then he placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "If you want to be," he said, "then yes, we're kind of family." Ruth smiled. Junie blinked hard to hold back tears. Alma wrapped her arms around Elias with all the trust her small heart carried. The mountains outside remained cold and wild, but inside that cabin, something warmer than fire had settled. Not just shelter, not just charity, but belonging, quiet, steady, and earned by kindness rather than blood. And so, the mountain man who once lived alone found himself surrounded by three souls who needed him as much as he needed them, not through chance, but through the simple courage of opening a door on a winter night. If you like part 2, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment more mountain chapters. So I know you want the next part.